Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So if you could find a seat. And Will, give me a thumbs up whenever we're cool. All right, so welcome to Rochester Christi. I'm Matthew, the president. So it's good to have you here. If you're not already on our email list and you would like to be, let us know, either me or one of our officers, and we can get that situated. Also, if you want to be a member, be a part of Rochester Christi as an RSO on campus, then also let us know, and also you have to be a student. So, but yeah, we can get you situated with that too. Officer elections will be April 7th. So let us know by this Friday if you're interested in being an officer, if you haven't already. What else? We are selling Challenging Conversations by Jason Jimenez for $5. And if you're interested in that, talk to Ben. Also, I'll throw this out. Next week we'll be meeting in the auditorium right across from the Heritage Room, provided that UNL doesn't suddenly switch it up on us again, which is how it goes. All right, that's it for announcements. So tonight we'll be having Wesley teach us. So give it up for Wesley.
Hello. Yes, it is different than what we had planned. So I am going to teach tonight. Just a note on the officer elections. If you have been thinking about that, go ahead and let us know. If you haven't let us know before, so we can, take you guys out, take whoever you are out to dinner and get to know you, and then have those, because I think the date is coming up on getting those elected. So these are some of the offices, and then these are some of the qualities that we're looking for in student leaders. And so we can have some quality students helping lead our Rochester Christi Club. So tonight, before I get started, I wanted to let you know just really quickly why we are changed from Ben and I. Ben and I were in Utah last week, and Ben just got home yesterday morning at like 4 in the morning, and so he asked me, he said, hey, can you do it for me? And I was like, sure, yes, of course. I'm very, very excited. So we just switched up really quickly so that he could have some time to make sure that he recovers. But that Utah trip, I wanted to just give a little quick summary of what happened, and I put together this presentation for you. So this is our Utah trip that we took last week. Hopefully, Lord willing, we'll put this on every year. It was amazing. We had about 23 students come. Here they are. That was a super fun group. We go and you get trained by people there, and you go evangelize. It is very evangelism focused, but it is in Utah, specifically targeted at the Latter-day Saint people. And so this was our group that we had. There was 23 of them. First, we went to, this is a picture of us out at Aaron's church. Aaron is another Rochester Christi member, a Rochester Christi director. This is his church. Then after his church on Sunday, we went to Latter-day Saint Ward service, and it was really sad to see all those people in there because they're lost, and just to hear their service and watch their reading of Scripture and their reading of the Book of Mormon and all those things. So it just, very weighty, broke your heart. This is Rob Savolka on your left and Bill McKeever on your right. These are just some ministry leaders that we learned from. This guy has a wagon, and in it is a replica of the golden plates that Joseph Smith is purported to have found and carried and walked and whatnot, and so he has a presentation with that. It was amazing. So josephlied.com is Rob Savolka's, and then MRM is Bill McKeever's. It was just, those are just a lot of ministries there. This is down at Temple Square. We are praying before we go to Temple Square and evangelize to the sister missionaries that are stationed on there. There was a lot of evangelism on this trip. It was really, really amazing. This one was a lot of fun because we got to, it's less intimidating because they come up to you and they want to talk to you, and so there's no like, how do I get into a conversation? So you just ask them their names and where they're from and all these things, and so then you're actually in an awesome conversation. So that was the intro to evangelizing. And then we walked around BYU's campus. Over here is some students talking to some sister missionaries. Here is a picture of me and a student that actually met that guy. I didn't know it was him at the time. I just saw Christ-centered campus at the bottom of his banner, and I was like, hey, I can use that as an intro and talking to somebody, and it turned out to be Brandon, that guy right there. So that was really amazing. So we go to Temple Square, we go BYU, and we went door knocking as well. Different people have different, liked different parts of that, with a bunch of different awesome stories. This is a group of students that are just a fellowship. We hung out, we had an Airbnb, we hung out, we had lots of questions, we went really deep, talked about the Trinity, talked about Calvinism, talked about eschatology, talked about antinomianism, the role of repentance for the Christian, but lots and lots of just fellowship and hanging out and deep study and deep questions. Every day we did a reflection of what we did that day, writing down how we feel, what happened that day, who we met so we can pray for them. This guy over here, this was my first picture. He and a couple of us were staying up, hanging out, talking about Matthew 24:34, where Jesus says, this generation will not pass away. And we were trying to work out what that meant. And we went really deep into it. And he found some line of reasoning that he wanted to go down. And I went to bed at 1. He stayed up till 2. I mean, this stuff, they get really deep into it, and you're busy in the Word. This is a picture of James and Jolene. James came on the trip last year with us, and it changed him, and then he wanted to come back and move to Utah, where he was from initially, or where he had been before. These guys are ex-Mormon Christians, and this panel of two is actually the third panel of two that we met. We met a panel of two that were ex-Mormon atheists. One was an atheist, and one was a postmodern Mormon, kind of not in the Mormon church, but still in there, just kind of postmodern. And that was, and then they fielded questions. Then the next panel of two were some faithful Mormons, and they fielded some questions for us as well, and that was a lot of fun to ask them questions and see how they answer, and then compare the two. And then these guys were just a breath of fresh air, because it's seeing their the way that their brains worked and coming out of Latter-day Saints and moving to Christianity. It was just amazing. So that was part of the trip as well. Here's just some resources that are available. This was from Tri-Grace Ministries, just the different versions of like kind of visuals that you can show Latter-day Saints about how their way to heaven and what it takes for them to get to heaven. You have to pass all these things. And then the Christian gospel is just salvation by grace, by faith through grace. By faith through grace. By grace through faith. There we go. This is the Provo City Temple. We went down there. Some students, a lot of students just elected to go down and share the gospel there. This guy is talking to this guy down on there. This is one of our students, and this is one of somebody that was just there, and they hung out. He got the nickname 3-Hour Will because his name's Will, and he always got into 3-hour conversations with people. It was crazy how many times it was just we'd go out evangelizing, and he's like, I talked to the same guy for the last 4 hours, and you're like, dude, how did you do that? Anyway, so he talked to him for a couple hours. It was amazing. So this is Aaron Marshall up at 105 eating eggs. So this is just the type of stuff that we do on this trip. So come next year, and this could be you. Okay. Tonight, we are getting into tactics. This is a very good book to get into if you are wanting to discuss your convictions. And it's written from a Christian perspective. The subtitle is A Game Plan for Discussing Your Christian Convictions. But if you're here tonight and you're not a Christian, you can still take away a whole lot of the tools on how to engage. So I recommend this book a whole lot. It's also called Tactics for a specific reason. We'll talk about this a little bit, but we're distinguishing tactics from strategy. I'm teaching you what's being taught in this book is it's kind of arranging, kind of moving on the fly, basically, like focusing on the immediate situation at hand. Yes, we have a bigger strategy, but it's more kind of moving this way. Kind of they say this, okay, how do I move to this? How do I maneuver this way? Kind of like in basketball when you somebody does this move, you do that move, right? So this is by Greg Koukl, and his ministry is called Stand to Reason, and I recommend his podcast and his books and things. He's a wonderful apologist. So tonight we're going to get into the first section of his book, and these are the sections we're going to unpack here tonight. So we're going to get into these. So the first one is diplomacy or D-Day. So what that means is, are we talking about things diplomatically, or is it this giant big old thing that is going to be very important and we're going to smash some heads, right? So diplomacy or D-Day, well, tactics, they help you stay and get in the driver's seat, and I'll talk about what that means. We're going to make them feel more diplomatic rather than very frightening. And they're distinguished from strategy. They're more like they're more tactics. And remember, they're not manipulative tricks or anything. They're not ruses. We're not trying to use them to belittle or humiliate anyone. They're supposed to be used to gain a footing and help the person think through what they actually are thinking. Okay, so remember, our theme for the semester is win some conversations. We're supposed to pursue truth, share the gospel, and love others. And these things that I'm going to give you today are tools for you to be able to navigate those conversations, okay? So when you think about evangelistic conversations, do you think about, like, win at all costs and destroy the opponent and intellectually slaughter them? Well, no, we're not trying to do that. We're trying to share the gospel with them. We're trying to lead them to Christ. We're not trying to win an argument. If we're trying to win at all costs, we might win the argument, but they'll think that Christians are jerks. And there's a good line that runs through this. It's if anyone in the conversation gets angry, you lose. So that's a general guideline. There are some exceptions to that, and I'm happy to field that question at the end. But if anyone gets mad in the conversation, you lose. You know what I mean? That you could probably have done better if they got mad. You could definitely have done better if you got mad, right? Okay, so reservations. There's a big difference between a fight and an argument. We're not trying to fight, we're trying to argue, and Ben has gone over this a little bit, talking about what an argument is. And so we as Christians are supposed to guard the truth. If we're not, we're not really learning how to argue well, and that puts us in an odd position. And there's those churches out there, there's those Christians out there that are just fight phobic. They stay away from it kind of at all costs and to a fault, and that's not healthy either. And they'll say something like, you can't argue someone into following Jesus. And I will agree, so long as we also agree that you can't love someone into following Jesus either. Because the thrust with saying you can't argue someone into the kingdom is that you shouldn't argue at all, and you should just love instead. But that's limiting the Spirit, I would argue, because without the work of God, we can't actually do anything at all, and the Holy Spirit is happy to use anything so long as it's done in love, right? So when we take that position, when we know that it's not on us, when it's God who changes hearts, we can just focus on our job. We can be faithful to act, be clear, be gracious, and be persuasive as to the best of our ability. And it's not on us. We don't have to feel that pressure, right? So here is what I would argue for you to do as an ambassador for your position. And atheists in the crowd, you're going to have to forgive me. I'm going to talk a lot about Christian convictions tonight, and so just apply that as you will. I know you will. Adopt a modest goal. Instead of having everything have this like, I need to do a great job, and instead of putting all that pressure on yourself, adopt a modest goal to just put a rock in their shoe. Try to give them something to think about. Have it just be something that what's a rock do when it gets in your shoe? Well, you can't stop thinking about it. You with every single step, it keeps bothering you. It gets more annoying, and eventually you have to deal with it. Right? That's what we're trying to do with these conversations. They don't have to be all wonderful gospel presentations, because maybe that's not what that person needs at the time. You're trying to get them to think better, think well, address any inconsistencies in their mind, and you're trying to be a good gardener. There's scripture references that Paul talks about where, I planted, Apollos watered, and God gives the growth, right? We're trying to be a good gardener. We're trying to be in that process so that the Holy Spirit can do his work. So here are your goals in the conversation. Number one, get up to bat, because a lot of you aren't getting up to bat. And if that can be your first goal, then yeah. So these are in order of importance. Get up to bat. That would be the main first thing, because if you're not doing that, then you're not doing anything else. Put a stone in their shoe. Have that kind of be your main goal, of just like that modest goal, that small little thing. Like if I can just give them something to think about, that would be the best. Ask good questions, and we'll talk a lot about questions. This is the winsome part. Make them want to have another conversation. And if you're not doing that, then you're losing the conversation. And remember, it's not a failure to not get to the gospel in every single conversation. But if you can, of course, by all means. If that's where it needs to be, if that's what needs to happen, do it. Ask them if you can share at the end. That would be wonderful. But if not, the conversation is not a waste. Okay, so now I'm going to break up into groups. I think I only do this like twice. But here is something just to think through your own place of where you are, and in these conversations. And so talk about what you think about when you consider getting in these conversations with people. When you try and talk about your Christian convictions, are you the first one, relishing the encounter? Are you willing but nervous? Are you frightened but you try, or do you avoid it kind of at all costs? So I want you to talk with your neighbor about this for a few minutes. It says 2, but I might give you 3. I don't know, maybe 2. Okay, ready, go. come on back to the area. Awesome, guys. Thanks for chatting. I think I have one more in there to do that. So hopefully tonight, when you went through what you were talking about and kind of sharing your fears with people and your reservations and stuff, thank you for doing that. But hopefully tonight we'll allay some of those fears. They'll kind of go away a little bit because you have a bit more tools to use when you get in these conversations. And if you're one of those people that identifies with any of the bottom three, or maybe even the top one, maybe you need to rearrange your priorities here. But I'll be showing this slide a whole lot, but make sure you kind of memorize or write it down or something these goals, because this is kind of where you should live, especially if you're like, I'm kind of nervous about things. Well, number one, get up to bat. You know what I mean? Get up and start talking. Say a word to somebody and see what happens. See where it goes. See if you can manage. And I'll give you some tools when you get outmatched. I'll give you some tools when you're feeling stuck or something, okay? And if I don't give you those tools, ask me at the end and tell me that I didn't give them to you. And I'll be super embarrassed. Next. We've gone through the first two. Next, we're going to get into number 3 here, getting in the driver's seat. And I'm going to talk about the Columbo tactic, and which is where we'll spend a whole lot of our time tonight on Lieutenant Columbo. It was a television show from 1968 to 2003. It was a detective, and he's known for his phrase, just one more thing, and he used appropriate questions in order to navigate with a suspect and kind of put them in a spot. He kind of drew them out. He was good at doing that. The guy on the right is Greg Koukl. He named this tactic the Columbo tactic, and so he puts on a trench coat and has his fake cigar and does the signature move. It's very funny. He's a very lovely man. But that's Lieutenant Columbo, and that's Greg Koukl of tactics. So tonight, I'll tell you a little bit about what the Columbo tactic is actually. Well, it's the use of questions. It's getting you in the driver's seat with the use of questions. And I know that sounds super simple, but that is how it works. Okay? So when you use questions, it protects you from jumping to conclusions and just and distorting what the other person means. It's an invitation to thoughtful dialogue. So because you're asking, you're inviting, right? You can gather information, or you can make a point indicating a problem in their thinking with just questions. So consider this interchange. It's wrong for you to force your views on other people. You can't legislate morality. Well, instead of talking directly and making statements to that person who made those statements, it's wrong for you to force your views on other people. You ask them a question. You say, do you vote? When you vote for someone, are you expecting your candidate to pass laws that reflect your point of view? Wouldn't that be forcing your views on someone else? I mean, you're doing those things. Don't all laws legislate some morality of some kind? Can you tell me one that doesn't? And so you're asking questions rather than saying nuh-uh or yeah. So you're drawing them out. You're dialoguing with them. This is what questions do. This is how you get into the driver's seat. You're using it to productively advance the conversation. So questions are conversation starters. They are interactive by nature. A lot of times they're neutral. They can be. We'll talk about when they're not. It gives you valuable time because then you're sitting, listening, and being a student of the other person, right? And they are essential to keeping you in the driver's seat. And I say that it means like you're the one kind of navigating the conversation because you're asking the person to explain their view, and when they give you their view, you can ask them about it, right? They're the one making statements. So the purpose of all of 3 of these Columbo questions that I'm going to give you, the first one gathers information, the second one reverses the burden of proof, we'll talk about all this, and the third one you use to make a point. And you got to remember, these are tactics. right? I'm going to give you a lot of information tonight, but they're tactics. So make sure that you focus on the tactic that you're doing at the time. Okay? Don't get too excited. Don't get too far ahead. Focus on the one that you're doing. So focus on number one. We'll get up to bat first, and then focus on number one. Gather information as much as you can. Okay? This is what questions do. You first gather information. You can't do the next ones without doing the first ones. Okay? So that was what the Columbo tactic is. It's using questions in your conversations. So Columbo, step number one, gather information. And I will give you a specific question that goes with how you gather information. It's what do you mean by that? Okay? And there are varieties for this, and I'll tell you some of those, but this is the first question which you can use to start a conversation, or you can use to continue a conversation, right? Columbo, step number one, gather information, ask them what they mean by that. A quote by Abraham Lincoln that I put in here is, give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, and I'll spend the first 4 sharpening the axe. Meaning, in our context, you need to know who you're talking to. You need to prepare what's going on. You can't just jump ahead and chop down the tree and chop down the person, right? You have to gather the information needed to understand their view. Okay? You need to gather that information before you challenge their viewpoint. So, take your time. Make sure you don't move ahead too quickly, because you don't want to misunderstand. This actually shows you care, because you're being interested, and actually be interested in the other person, right? Don't feign interest. This is helping you draw out really important things, because sometimes they make a statement, and their statement is shrouded in all of this like emotional baggage. And it would be very important for you to know that in order to figure out how to proceed if you're gonna try to challenge their claim, because it may just be like just this huge, heavy emotional burden that they carry, whatever the situation is. But you don't want to give them an intellectual argument against their view necessarily if they're carrying this emotional baggage. They may just need care. They may just need to know that you care and you sympathize with them. So that's what questions will do. And we are pretty excited to get out there and tell them what our view is, and show them why their thinking is flawed or incorrect. But make sure that you drag this out. Emotional baggage is prevalent. So, what do you mean by that is the question, and there are different iterations of this which you can readily see. So it's used as a conversation starter. The example in tactics he uses is, does that necklace have spiritual significance or religious significance? It's just a form of what do you mean by that, right? Or I put in, what's your tattoo mean? People have tattoos, and they're asking to be asked about them. That's why they have them. If they didn't, they need to cross it out and put a different name over it or whatever that is, right? So ask them about their tattoos. They love talking about them. Does that tattoo mean something? Did you get it for any reason? Because maybe it's not. Or maybe they're wearing a shirt that says, I hate squirrels, and you go up and be like, how dare you hate squirrels? And they're like, hey, I have no other shirts. How dare you? So you don't know why they're wearing that shirt. Maybe they don't actually believe in the message. Okay? So what do you mean by that is a wonderful conversation starter. They're reading a book. Hey, what do you think of that book so far? So that you can actually figure out why they're reading it. That would be an important reason. I would want to know why somebody's reading that book. Maybe they're learning. Maybe they're just trying to figure out what Rob Bell talks about, what he means, right? So ask them why they're doing things. What do you mean by that? And these are all just variations of what do you mean by that. It can also be used as a clarification tool in a conversation. This is the one that I'm used to, because if somebody's saying some stuff, it's usually a word that I want to key in on. And so I say, what do you mean by evolution? Or what do you mean by evil? Because you may not actually agree with them, or they talk about why they don't believe God exists or something, or why they don't why God doesn't exist. And you say, what do you mean by God? Because maybe their definition of God is somebody I also don't believe in, right? And so you can use that to navigate that conversation. Or they say science has proved there's no God. How did science do that? Another, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that statement? What are you trying to get at, okay? Abortion's okay because a fetus is a human but not a person. What's the difference between those? What do you mean by that? Right? So, it helps to have that question in your head, but it also helps when you change it, because otherwise you're just saying, what do you mean by that too many times? And it is kind of a joke in the Christian community of people who care about tactics. So, these are ways to ask for clarification on something, on a piece of jewelry, on something they said. You're asking for clarification, which is very helpful, right? So why clarity matters? Well, you don't want to misunderstand yourself. You don't want to misunderstand what they're saying. You don't want to assume what they're saying, because that leads you to misrepresent, which leads to a straw man. And a straw man, as you all have seen my logical fallacies talk a couple weeks ago, right? Of course you did. You're all wonderful students. I gave a talk on logical fallacies. Straw man was one of them. A straw man is jumping to defend or explain or argue with with another person that's not actually saying what that argument is. So when you assume and when you misrepresent and then attack that misrepresentation, that's a straw man. And so if you don't, so why asking for clarification helps that is you don't want to create a straw man. Maybe they don't actually believe that. Maybe they have a different way to explain their view that you don't understand. The third way that clarity helps is you don't want the other person to misunderstand himself. And this is actually quite common when you get into these conversations, because you can explain, you can say, hey, what do you mean by that? And they haven't thought it through. And nothing against them. We haven't thought through some statements we've said, right? And so often you'll get a blank stare, or they can get upset at you because they're just kind of repeating slogans that they found nice, or maybe those slogans have worked for them in the past and they haven't been challenged on them. And so you're just politely asking what they mean by a certain word or a certain phrase, and they haven't thought through it, and so they don't know how to defend it. And so you're just asking for clarification. It's not an unreasonable request. People need to have people are expected to have good reasons for what they hold. Okay, so be patient because maybe they haven't thought through it. This is something I put in. I said learn the lesson from solipsism, because when we start talking to people, solipsism is a certain metaphysical theory that you're the only person that exists and everyone else is a figment of your brain, figment of your mind, right? So you're the only one that exists, and nobody else does. So when thinking about talking with somebody who believes that, what evidence could you give them to show them that that's not what's happening? Yeah.
I'm not that creative.
That's right. You're not that creative. I understand, because no evidence at all would be convincing for someone who believes in solipsism. Because if you just say, "Hey, this is you're real because I can punch you," and you're like, "Well, that's just my brain telling me that I hurt because my brain is hurting me and wants to trick me." So the point with this, this certain theory has gotten into. They've cornered themselves in a position that's unfalsifiable. You can't actually argue against them because there's no way to give them any evidence that they would find convincing. So my point with this is that when you're talking to somebody, see if they're actually reasonable. Because you have to, sometimes maybe that's the lesson that they need to learn. And that's kind of the only argument against solipsism is like, hey, that's not very reasonable. And then you got to leave it at that, because no other evidence is gonna convince them. They have to get out of it themselves. But my point with solipsists is that sometimes when you're talking to somebody, they have cornered themselves in a position that is unfalsifiable as well. So you have to kind of draw that out, see if that's where they are. See if that's where you are. This is also important for you. Are you reasonable? A couple of semesters ago, I gave a talk called "Are You Reasonable?" I think it is. And I talk about different ways that people do this, and I draw this out, so go look it up, it's awesome. But what you need to do is you need to ask them what kind of evidence would be convincing. Or there's a famous question that comes up a lot when you're talking with atheists and Christians. What would it take for you to change your mind? And this comes up fairly frequently if you watch debates and stuff. And it's really difficult to come up with an answer to that because you don't actually know necessarily what would change your mind. And so it's a good check to see if you are reasonable. Are you reasonable in what you hold? Is the other person you're talking to actually reasonable in what they hold? So this is just something, this is the thing when you're talking with somebody, see if this is where they are, and see if this is the conversation you need to have with them, okay? So there's nothing wrong with actually believing something with conviction. It's when that conviction disallows new information to point in a different direction, or to have a different answer be the right one, okay? So there's a few examples. Richard Dawkins recently was talking about how he now doesn't believe that anything will cause him to change his mind. He used to actually say, if God wrote in the clouds, I am God, or something, or the second coming of Jesus. He said he might believe that, if then maybe God exists. But then he's kind of backed off on that and actually said, I'm starting to think nothing would change his mind, right? So it's more likely that it's a hallucination or a dream, or if all else fails, aliens. That would be more likely than God existing, because as far as I know, he's worked himself into this position where nothing is going to convince him, right? Or J. Warner Wallace is an apologist, and he talks about it's unreasonable if a detective comes in a room to a crime scene knowing who did it already, kind of having an idea of it's the husband, that's who it is. So he's looking for evidence that supports that claim. Or he comes in knowing that it's not the guy across the hall. He's like, nope, not that guy. But what if the evidence points to that? Nope, it's got to be something else. That is an unreasonable place to be. And that is something we have to draw out when we're trying to point out truth claims, especially about the Christian faith, right? So, where is your skeptometer? How skeptical are you of certain claims? Does God exist? Or God exists, are you less skeptical about that so that any amount of evidence proves it? My argument is to be a fair amount of skeptical, but don't be all the way to 10, because otherwise then no amount of evidence will ever get you anywhere, right? Will ever convince anyone. So know where you are on that. Just check to see what is convincing you, or what you're trying, this is evidence for this. Perfect. I'll take it and add it to my pocket. Done. Without even checking to see if it's legitimate or not, right? This is my point with solipsism. Sometimes you talk to people who are unreasonable, and this is the point that you need to make. So my summary of the Columbo question number 1, what do you mean by that? This first question helps you immediately get engaged in an interactive way, shows genuine interest in the other person's view, urges them to think more clearly. You get a free education because you're actually sitting there asking them questions and learning about a fellow human being that God loves. And there's no real pressure on you because you're not the one doing much. You're just asking for clarification. You're merely engaging with what they said, rather than like having a giant point to make. Because your goal is just to put a rock in their shoe, right? It's not to make them come to Jesus right then. That would be amazing, but probably not going to happen in every single conversation, right? All right, Columbo number 2, reversing the burden of proof. I like to call it putting the burden of proof where it actually belongs. Okay, so I'll talk about burden of proof here. This is important, the one who makes the claim bears the burden of proof. So, if the person makes a statement about a thing, it is their job to support that idea. Don't let them switch it onto you. Don't let them have it be your job to disprove what that thing is. That is an illicit transfer of the burden of proof because you haven't made a claim yet. You've just asked a question if you did, right? It's a fair expectation that people offer good reasons for the important things they think are true. So think of it as a house. So that the roof of a house is the argument that's made, and then the walls are the supporting premises, right? You have to have walls that support your argument, otherwise it's just a roof on the ground. Otherwise it's just kind of a statement that's said out loud. There's no reason to accept what you are saying. So you can ask for reasons or facts to support the conclusions that somebody makes. I was tabling in the union last year, and I was talking to a guy with a clipboard. He was walking around trying to get people signed up for whatever. And we were talking about the stuff that was on my sign, and he was giving me some cool ideas. It was very interesting to talk to him, but he didn't have any reasons for what he believed. I asked him, can you tell me why you think that? And he would say, 'cause I know, or that's how I feel. And I would say, how do you know? And he would repeat, 'cause I know. I'm like, and I think I told him, I'm like, you're not giving me any compelling reasons to believe your position. Because that's all he had. I think he had that conversation before, and it sounded nice, and he just adopted it. So that was a roof without any walls. Okay, so people have to have walls. You need to have walls for the roof that you're explaining, the roof that you hold. So the question that Columbo number 2 is, so first we have Columbo 1, that's what do you mean by that? And 2, it's how did you come to that conclusion? Said in a variety of ways, but it's how did you come to that conclusion? Asking for the walls of their house, right? How do you know that? Why do you think that? What reasons can you give me for that thing that you said, right? It helps you ensures you to draw out and understand the other person's point of view, and helps the other person think through the reasons they hold that claim. I was given a talk on the evidence for the resurrection, and I was challenged by the Islamic viewpoint that Jesus never died on the cross, and wouldn't that fix all the reasons I was giving for his resurrection? And I kind of just went into a whole bunch of stuff. I was talking about Bart Ehrman saying that the most important fact in history is that, something we know with certain is that Jesus died on a Roman cross and all these things. And I went into all the sources and all the things. I did not ask the question that I should have. Because they made an assertion. They said they asked a question. They said, Jesus never died on the cross. So says the Quran. And I was like, and I should have just, how did you come to that conclusion? So why do you think that? And yes, I need to have my answers, which I do. But I want to know why they ask that, why they hold that. Because if that's the right reason, I should abandon what I think and take what they think. If that's the right answer. Guys, remember, we're seeking truth. We want to go where truth leads, wherever it goes. Okay? So, how did you come to that conclusion is the second one. You have to remember that answers don't just have to be possible, they have to be plausible and more probable than yours. Okay? So there's that argument that we need to have about the reasons for believing. So an alternate explanation is not a refutation. We saw it this last week. And I'll give that example here in a second. They have to be more plausible, all things considered, than the thing you're offering. This last week, and this is something that I believe, and we talked to those ex-Mormon atheists, and one of them we asked about kind of the why don't you think God exists, or why do you have any idea of the do you not find the arguments compelling or whatever? And he kind of threw out this the multiverse, right? And then the next question was, do you have any evidence for that? And he said no. It's just a possibility. And it definitely is a possibility, for sure. But a possibility is not, an alternate explanation that's possible is not a refutation of the arguments given. Right? So what he needed to do, this guy, wonderful man, nice guy, liked his journey. What he needed to do was interact with the arguments given. Now, we weren't there to talk about arguments for God's existence. We were there to hear his journey. But one of our Ratio Christi people there asked him about it. And so that was what happened. But this is often what happens with that. And I mean, Christians are also not immune to just throwing out a possibility and then backing off and not having reasons for it, okay? You have to have good reasons for what you believe, which is one of the reasons we're here. So, question for the group, again, time. What question, Columbo 1 or Columbo 2, what do you mean by that? How'd you come to that conclusion? Would you use with any of these? Talk to your groups, ready, go. I'm important. All right. So this was in order to get you thinking about how these conversations would go, kind of what would be next, what would be first, where you would go, and hopefully you found that both questions are helpful in all of these conversations, right? So there's a lot to pick apart, and it's also kind of hard because it's just statements and you don't actually know the person, you don't know the background. So I'm glad you guys got to work through that and kind of think through these questions, how you would use them, how you would move through them. Okay, we're moving along to 2 reliable rescues. So this is in between Columbo 2 and Columbo 3. This is just kind of some rescues for you. I told you I'd give you some tools to get out of a conversation or figure out if you feel overwhelmed. This is where this will be. So the first one is talks about that illicit time where someone reverses the burden of proof illicitly, wrongly. So the professor's ploy is where the professor, or really anybody, makes a claim and then switches the burden of proof onto you, making you defend. Like if the professor says something and then you ask a question and then he asks you to defend a position that you haven't actually said, that would be reversing the burden of proof illicitly. So don't allow that to happen. Just calmly say, I haven't made a claim. You're the one who said this, and I was asking about it. That is how to get that back onto the person who made the claim. Okay, so that was just that spot that I needed to put that. Now, to give you a bit more context about what happens when somebody reverses the burden of proof wrongly. So, rescue number one, getting out of the hot seat. So shift from argument mode to fact-finding mode. So instead of feeling like you need to, you're being peppered with things, tell them, let me think about that. Tell them, that's a neat point I haven't heard of before, or I haven't actually considered that. Be honest with them, and just say, hey, that's a neat point, good idea. I don't run in the circles you do, and so that's really cool. I say that to my buddy a lot. I'm like, man, you have some ideas that I have never even considered, so I need to think about them a bit more and figure out what they are. And then I go into, tell me more about what that is, because you need to figure out what they're talking about, because you hadn't heard about it. Maybe other people have thought about it too. So use the magic phrase. Let me think about it, and then shift back to Columbo 1 and Columbo 2. What do you mean by that, and how did you come to that conclusion? And then thank them for telling you. The second reliable rescue is narrating the debate. Summarize in clear terms what happened. Often what happened in the debate, and move that the other person did. So just kind of explain what happened. This is also even helpful even when you're not trying to point out something that the other person did that was illicit and kind of shifting things wrongly. This is just helpful to kind of keep you and keep them on track from moving on. You can kind of just say, let's take a step back and look what happened. Or did you notice what happened? I raised a question about the legitimacy of your idea that Muslims and Christians worship the same God, and you called me a name. You called me a racist, which I don't know what race has to do with this question here, but I noticed I wanted you to notice that you changed the subject to just name calling. You called me a bad name, and we're not talking about the subject anymore. Kind of talk to them, narrate the debate, narrate what happened, show them that this is the move they made, and that was shifting from one thing to another. Now, if they'd like to talk about those things, you can, and tell them that. And I like moving things. I'm kind of spatial, so I put things here and put things here. And it also shows them that this is way over there, and this is way over here. Maybe it's just for me, I don't know. But getting out of that hot seat and narrating the debate is how you do those things. So, moving on. We have gone through 1 through 6. We're on to Columbo 3, and you are eagerly awaiting what that question will be. I will tell you. With Columbo 3, you use questions to make a point. You've done the work of 1, of what do you mean by that, gathering all that information. You've done the work of 2, how did you come to that conclusion, learning what they actually believe and why they believe that thing. And 3 is you get to point those things out. But with Columbo, you use questions, right? So based on their answers to those 2 questions, you now can challenge their ideas. The key to this one is mainly paying attention to the way they answered number 2, because they gave you their reasons. And we learned from our logic lectures that their reasons are why they hold up their conclusion. And if their reasoning is faulty, that needs to be pointed out. It doesn't mean their conclusion's wrong, but it needs to be pointed out by how they got there. And you said, how did you come to that conclusion? And so they told you how they got there, right? And so now you get to point that out. So you have to address any inconsistency with a question. And the question is, have you ever considered? is the form question that we use. But it's not necessarily used in those 4 words, right? This is kind of your intro into introducing a new subject. And it's also in a question form, right? Because you have a different way to view what the subject at hand, but you want to use a question at the front end. I want to say to soften the blow, but I want it to be, I don't want you to soften, I just want it to be, it's a way to introduce the subject without being harsh, right? Have you ever considered that maybe, and then give them your viewpoint, and if it connects the dots better, which hopefully it does, if it doesn't, don't hold it, better than theirs, right? Then they can consider it. And that's all you're asking them to do. You're not saying you're wrong because that's a terrible thing to think, and this is the right way to think. That's just not how you talk to people, right? Hopefully. So, here are other versions of this question. Can you clear this up to me? Correct me if I'm wrong, or I'm having trouble understanding the way you got from here to here. I have I see things differently. Can I share with you the view I hold, and you can point out where you think I'm mistaken? Because that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to figure out, you're trying to teach them, hopefully, tell them what you believe and why you believe it. And if you're wrong, then that needs to be pointed out, right? So, your answer, obviously, I say obviously, but your answer should be a better explanation than theirs. And if theirs is a better explanation, all things considered, then adopt that. We're trying to think well. We're trying to reason well here at Ratio Christi, right? So, a lot of times you don't actually need to offer anything new. This isn't something that, like, especially if you've asked them about their reasons that they hold things, or you know a little bit more about their background, like they're Christians, but they're having trouble with something in Christianity, and they want to believe something that's outside, and you say, and so then use questions to point that out. Something that they already know, but they're reasoning incorrectly, and so you kind of just remind them, or you're showing them where they misstepped in their argument. You're connecting the dots for them. You're putting all the pieces on the table. Or you need to know some logical fallacies, and you need to, or ways of logic, ways of reasoning, and point out why their reasoning is wrong. Pay attention to the other person's answer, number 2, to Columbo number 2. How'd you come to that conclusion? And point out that fallacy. See if it's actually circular reasoning or a category mistake or whatever they're doing there, right? So, question number 3. Have you ever considered? So these are some helpful things to help you get the point across. Because oftentimes when we're talking about Christian convictions, things that we hold dearly in a secular culture, tensions can rise because of the subject matter. And so this is a way to, if you find yourself in a situation where you suspect that your convictions are going to be labeled intolerant, bigoted, or narrow-minded, or judgmental, what you need to do is ask the person if you can share your views. Say, hey, this is a really important question. I don't mind telling you, but before I do, I want to know if I can share. Because if not, I don't want to be berated with anger and hostility. Do you consider yourself tolerant? Intolerant? Is diversity actually okay, or is it not okay? Because I don't want to say what I believe and then just get beaten over the head. And this is just kind of a way to bring this out in the open and actually say, hey, I'm going to hold I'm going to say my view, but I don't want it to be taken the wrong way. Is it okay that I hold this, or is it not okay? But do you consider yourself a tolerant person or an intolerant person? Or kind of pointing out what that tolerant intolerant paradigm where they're calling you intolerant, but what they're actually being is intolerant because they're not letting any views go. There's those different things at play. So this is a helpful way to make a point, because oftentimes when we talk about our Christian convictions, tensions can rise. So here's what to do if you are stumped and you don't know what to say, or you've reached the end of your knowledge and you're like, okay, well, thanks for the talk. I don't know what to say next. Goodbye. That's not it. So you don't actually have to feel compelled to force that conversation further. You can just be content with the fact-finding, the asking what they mean, and what they are talking about. You will actually learn something, hopefully, right? That's what you're trying to do. You're trying to talk to somebody. You're in charge of your side of the conversation, okay? Just like reversing the burden of proof, you're not obligated to answer something that you haven't made a claim about. If you have made a claim, you do, and then you can tell them I've never had that argument against me, so I need to go look it up. Could you tell me more about that or something? So ask them those things. So that's what you do if you're stumped or stalled out. You don't have to feel compelled to keep going. You can just be content with fact-finding, switch back to fact-finding mode. You're in charge of your side. So how to perfect Columbo, and this is just an ongoing process for you. You anticipate, reflect, and practice. So anticipate comes from 1 Peter 3:15, which is all about apologetics. Always be ready to give an answer to everyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that you have. Do it with gentleness and respect. So always be ready. That's what anticipating means. That's what we're doing. Reflect. You're going to make mistakes. That's okay. Reflect with a friend. Talk through things. Figure out what happened. Kind of say, hey, I had this conversation. What should I do? Or, hey, I did this. That was wrong. Help me out with that. You're going to make mistakes when you start getting up to bat, which you all will, I'm very sure. And practice. Work through what you should have said. Practice with the friend after reflecting. I like to turn off the radio when I hear a statement and be like, okay, how would I answer this? And then I go through it. I don't have anybody there to argue against me, so usually I win. But it's a good thing to work through to see if you can actually stand up to what's presented, okay? And here at Ratio Christi, we do a lot of anticipating, right? We're doing a lot of doing these things. Actually, a lot of these things we can do here with the people that we have, okay? So that's what we're doing here at Ratio Christi. How great is that? It's the best. Okay, turnabout. Defending against Columbo. So this is when people are using these things against you. Now, there shouldn't be any risk when someone asks you question number 1 or question number 2. What do you mean by that, and how did you come to that conclusion? You should be really excited about that because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to tell them what we mean and why we believe it, right? Know what you believe, know why you believe it. That's what we're here for. Okay? We gladly welcome that opportunity. So you're inside. This is a reminder. You're in control of your side of the situation. You're not obligated to continue a conversation, especially if tensions get heated and they're super upset at you or something. You're not obligated to continue that conversation. You can just politely say thank you and walk away. Like if it comes to that, really. Don't be afraid to say, I'll have to give that some thought. Let me think about it, right? There's that usage of, I'll have to think about that. You've given me something to think about. Thank them for their giving you new information. Watch for a misleading question or a question that can be taken in different directions, because this is sometimes where it's sneaky or manipulative. Where I think of a couple years ago, I opened the door and it was some insurance salesmen, and they were holding out these like pictures and stuff and like trying to elicit a response from me, and I was like, I see you trying to go somewhere. Could you just tell me what you're here to say? Because I don't really like this journey that you're trying to take me on. I'm not comfortable with it. And I just said that to them out loud, and then we moved on. Because I didn't really want to go down the track with them that they wanted to take me, because it felt like a trap. And I don't like being trapped, right? So watch for misleading questions or questions that aren't actually questions, that are kind of attack statements, such as, what gives you the right to say someone else's religion is wrong? This is meant to stop you in your tracks. It's disguised as a question. There's a question mark at the end of it. But does that person actually want to talk about rights? Like the rights that you have to say that someone else's religion is wrong? No, it's kind of an attack. So watch out for these questions that are disguised. They're not actually questions. It's more of an accusation. or the who are you to say, or who's to say, that's just your interpretation, kind of stopping you, and you're like, well, are you going to deal with my interpretation? Are you going to actually engage with that? Or who are you to say is do they really want your credentials? Probably not. They're trying to just stop you in your tracks because for whatever reason they have. Okay, we went through all of these, and here are the quick notes of each one. Strategy versus tactics, not used to belittle. Have a modest goal. What's your modest goal? Rocking the shoe. That's right. Good job. Getting in the driver's seat is use of questions. Columbo 1 is what do you mean by that? Columbo 2 is how'd you come to that conclusion? Shift to fact-finding mode and narrate the debate. Have you ever considered is Columbo 3. Perfecting it is just practicing, working at it, practicing, reflecting, and then remembering that you're in charge of your side of the conversation. Okay? So this is what we talked about today. Your modest goal is put a rock in the shoe when you are up to bat, right? We're supposed to pursue truth, share the gospel, and love others. That's what our tagline is for our Winsome Conversations semester. That's what we're trying to do today. Hopefully I've given you some tools in order to go out and practice. Go out and practice and just get up to bat once and then put a stone in somebody's shoe. Try to ask that first Columbo question, okay? Now, does anyone have any questions before I invite Adam up here? Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I don't know. I was kind of thinking like there are some positions where I feel like I will be slightly more unreasonable about. Like I'm a pretty strong believer in the existence of God. I'm a pretty strong believer in the resurrection of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Where would you say would be like a healthier skepticism?
Yeah.
Towards that? Because obviously someone presents you with the reasoning dead body of Jesus.
Yeah.
Like that's going to put an end to my beliefs really quick.
Maybe.
But that's probably not going to happen anytime soon.
Yeah.
So where would you say would be a good place to skepticism?
That's an excellent question. So the question's about the skeptometer and holding things with conviction, and then where would be a healthy place to be on certain things that you hold with conviction, such as God's existence, resurrection, and that is exactly what I'm talking about. Is where are you on that? Is something that you need to figure out, because if you are so somebody gives you an argument for God's existence, and says, okay, you like the conclusion, but you're not actually looking at any of the reasons, because you're like, okay, God exists, I'm on board. That's a good argument for God's existence. Done. No, because that would be you'd be way over it. Let me go this way. You'd be way over at 1, right? You'd be like, anything is proof for God's existence because I like the conclusion, right? I would say don't do that, because there could be some terrible arguments for God's existence. So it's be reasonable is what the thrust of that is. So where should you be on those things? It's also don't be way over here where no evidence at all can convince you otherwise. So think about, have a healthy skepticism is what I'm saying. So I hover around the 4s and 6s and stuff. But as far as those things, I would argue don't just accept a conclusion because you like the conclusion. And I would encourage, go watch that video I did, the Ratio Christi night we had. It was called "Are You Reasonable?" I think. Or there's a YouTuber that does something that's called Scooby-Doo in the case of the silly skeptic, and he talks about Richard Dawkins and talks about Scooby-Doo, and here's all this evidence for zombies, or and then how much more evidence do you need? And this guy's an ardent non-believer, but they're actually real, and all these things. So it's really, it gets you thinking about what would actually convince you. So what would be a healthy skepticism is I just don't be at 1 where anything anything goes for anything you like, because you need to be convinced. Good arguments are good regardless of who holds them, and good arguments are good kind of regardless of. Yeah. Thank you. I was like, there was somewhere I was going. I appreciate it, what the conclusion is. Appreciate it. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Okay. Good stuff. Now you're all equipped with the first half of Greg Koukl's book, which you should still buy. Janae.
I'd like to hear more about what the stone in the shoe is.
Yes. That is a great question. What is the stone in the shoe? So that would depend on the person, because what you're trying to do is draw out what they believe and then figure out why they believe it. And so if you can leave them with something that causes them to so in the case of Christians versus non-Christians, we're trying to point out that Christianity is more reasonable than the non-Christian view, right? So when you navigate that conversation, there's going to be something that bumps up against the Christian worldview and disagrees with it somewhere. And so what you're trying to do is point out why your version is more reasonable and better evidenced than their explanation of that thing. So you're not trying to get them to the gospel right away, unless that's where they are, right? So it's figuring out what their argument is for whatever topic you're talking about, and then the Christian explanation will be better evidenced. And so you're trying to. So when you say, "Have you ever considered?" You can share that version. So it depends on where they are, why their reasons, and even if it's just to get them to understand that their reasons aren't good for holding that thing, that would be a rock in their shoe. It doesn't have to be your version versus their version all the time. It can just be that their reasons to get there are not well evidenced and not well reasoned. And so to put that rock in their shoe, just to give them something to think about is what that is. Did that get to where you were figuring out? It's not a one thing. It's because there's all kinds of different arguments. Harrison. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. So getting up to bat, how do you do that the best way? That does seem to be the scariest thing. And so I would go back to some of those. So the what do you mean by that question is just you asking them about themselves. This last week, I went up to somebody on BYU's campus, and he was holding this big old tote thing with a bunch of stickers and bags and stuff. And I said, "Hey, that's sure a lot of stuff. What's it all for?" A variation of, "What do you mean by that?" Right? I could have said that. That wouldn't have been very appropriately put, but I'm asking him why he's holding a bunch of stuff. I am walking up to somebody and kind of interrupting their day, and so that's kind of weird. That's why I like door knocking a little better, because it's like, "Hey, I'm here to say words to you." But I'm asking him about what he's doing. I say, "Hey, what's all that for?" And he's like, "Oh, it's campaign stuff." I'm like, "Oh, neato." And then I went into the thing that I wanted to talk about, which is who is Jesus. But so it's what do you mean by that? It's if you do have to be intentional, which is why getting up to bat is the first step. And sometimes it happens. An opportunity can present itself that you didn't plan on. Like if you're already in a conversation with one of your classmates or something, and they say something odd, and you're like, "Hey, I have thoughts on that," and then you can ask them what they mean, right? So being ready and open to those opportunities Praying about it, asking God for those opportunities, that would be something I would recommend. But if you're going to be intentional and like, hey, I'm going to go start a conversation with somebody, then look for those opportunities. Last year, I remember Ben talking about he went up to some people and was like, hey, you're sitting on a lawn, can we sit next to you? It was just this like, I'm going to sit here and talk to you now. So you kind of got to get over that hump of being nervous about it. But if somebody doesn't want to talk to you, they'll say, no, I'm good. And you say, see ya. So yeah, finding neat ways to use what do you mean by that. Like if they have the tattoo, that's a lot of fun. Or the shirt, Ben uses the shirt a lot. He goes, I like that shirt. It's not even, it's sort of a, hey, I'd like to stop and if you want to talk, but they can say thanks and keep walking. I keep referencing Ben. Apparently he's really good at this. Good job, Ben. But yeah, that would be it.
We'll cover a lot of those like specifics or just some ideas next week.
Alrighty. Adam has an announcement.
Imagine learning how to play basketball by just listening to lectures on basketball. It'd be a little bit difficult. Not to say anything bad about lectures on basketball. You should learn some things from that. But really, to learn how to play basketball, you have to get in there and actually bounce the ball, shoot it to the hoop, practice. So I want to give you guys an opportunity to actually practice these things. So try and get a group together sometime during the week, maybe a Saturday morning, maybe Tuesday night, maybe Sunday afternoon, whatever works for the group. You actually practice these things. The best way to learn and overcome some of the nervousness, the fear, is just role playing. Just practicing these things. So I'm going to be back here if you're interested in doing that, either the rest of the semester or somebody throw out the idea of possibly doing this practicing class over the summer. I'm open to that possibility too. But either way, if you're interested, come and talk to me. I'll be back here, and I'm just kind of making a list of who all is interested in being part of it.
Awesome. Thanks, Adam. Yes, I like that analogy of sitting in a classroom and watching how to play basketball, and then you never actually get out on the court. So yeah, that's why I said we're doing a lot of anticipating here, but get out there and practice and reflect. Get better at it. Go to the Utah trip next year, but that's next year, right? So Adam is putting together a class to actually practice this type of stuff, so you can go out and work at it. And remember, it's this order: get up to bat, put a stone in their shoe, and if you don't put a stone in their shoe and you just got up to bat, you win, right? You've done more than you've done before. Okay, so work at it, practice it, and if you're not a Christian, use these things as well to try to have good conversations, guys. This is what we're here for. Win some conversations. So thanks for coming. I will see you another time.